Before we descend into the shadows of the past, a brief note. The story you are about to hear is a work of historical fiction. It is woven from real military tactics used during the Civil War, designed to shine a light on the silent courage of those whom history has long forgotten. In a dusty corner of the Hartford Historical Society lies a mountain of forgotten treasures. But nothing had ever seized the attention of Dr. Sarah Mitchell, quite like the ornate wooden frame leaning against a nondescript filing cabinet. The portrait tagged CPA 1903 depicts a quintessential Victorian wedding. The groom stands tall, stern, and elegant in his black suit, beside a bride draped in an exquisite white gown of intricate lace. As a photographic historian specializing in early American portraiture, Sarah had analyzed thousands of images like this. The stiff poses, the somber expressions, the meticulous arrangement of hands and fabric, it was all perfectly normal for the era. In 1903, long exposure times made smiling almost impossible. But as Sarah moved the frame toward the window, something shifted. The late afternoon Connecticut sun sliced through the glass, illuminating details previously lost in the gloom of the archives. "Just a normal wedding photo," she whispered to herself, yet her fingers traced the edge of the frame as if pulled by an invisible force. On the back, a simple handwritten note. Thomas and Elizabeth, June 15, 1903. Hartford. No surnames. No photographer's mark. Total anonymity for a couple who clearly belonged to Hartford's rising middle class. Sarah was about to set the portrait aside when a stray beam of light hit the glass at a perfect angle. For a split second, the bride's expression changed. There was something there, something that should not exist in a 1903 photograph, something that defied every social custom and photographic rule of the early 20th century. A secret was staring back at her, and it was about to change everything Sarah knew about the past. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she realized this seemingly ordinary portrait was shielding an extraordinary secret. Her hands, usually steady from years of archival work, trembled slightly as she carried the frame to her desk. She placed it under the harsh, adjustable beam of her analysis lamp, a place where the past has nowhere to hide. Reaching for her magnifying glass, a tool that had unmasked countless hidden truths, over her 15-year career, Sarah leaned in. The bride's face, which appeared stern and conventional from a distance, began to transform under the lens. Sarah blinked hard, certain her eyes were playing tricks on her. She adjusted the focus, her pulse quickening with every passing second. There it was, faint but undeniable. Elizabeth was smiling. This wasn't the forced, artificial grin of later decades. It was a genuine, suppressed smile, a slight twitch of the lips that hinted at an irrepressible joy or a private joke. "Impossible," Sarah whispered into the empty archive room. "To understand why this is shocking, you must understand the year 1903. Victorian photography was an ordeal of stillness. Long exposure times meant subjects had to remain frozen like statues for minutes. To smile was not just technically difficult, it was socially inappropriate. The rigid etiquette of Hartford society demanded a somber, dignified countenance. The contrast was staggering. The groom Thomas was the picture of Victorian propriety, stiff formal, and radiating the stern authority of the era. Everything about him screamed tradition. But Elizabeth She was breaking every rule in the book. While Thomas represented the order of the old world, Elizabeth's smile was a silent act of rebellion captured in silver halide. What could have possibly provoked such a smile in a moment of such forced gravity? As Sarah stared into those eyes, she realized she wasn't just looking at a wedding photo. She was looking at a mystery that defied history itself. Elizabeth wasn't just smiling. She was sharing a secret. Her eyes weren't fixed on the lens, but perhaps on someone standing just over the photographer's shoulder. Driven by an urgent need for answers, Sarah fired up her laptop. She began a digital manhunt cross-referencing every wedding photography studio in Hartford from 1903. She scrutinized the wallpaper patterns, the furniture arrangements, even the specific weave of the carpet beneath their feet. Every thread, every floral motif was a potential coordinate to the location of this impossible portrait. By the next morning, Sarah was entrenched in the main library of Hartford, surrounded by the scent of decaying paper and historical archives. Sleep had become a secondary thought. Her mind was a whirlwind of theories about the smiling bride. What started as professional curiosity had calcified into a true obsession, a hunger for a truth that refused to be found. She scoured the Hartford currents from June 1903. She searched for any mention of a Thomas and Elizabeth marrying on the 15th. Nothing. Sarah expanded her search to the surrounding towns West Hartford, East Hartford, Bloomfield. Still, she was met with a deafening silence. No records, no certificates, no legal footprints of any kind. It was as if this couple had never existed in any official capacity. There they were captured in high-definition silver halide, yet they remained ghosts in the machine of history. Was this a wedding portrait or a perfectly staged disappearance? The truth is often hidden in plain sight, waiting for those brave enough to look. If you're ready to join Sarah in unearthing more of history's forgotten mysteries, hit that like button and subscribe right now so you never miss a chilling revelation. What do you believe was the real secret behind Elizabeth's impossible smile? Share your theories in the comments below. Sometimes the wildest guess is the only one that makes sense. Sarah's search led her to Mrs. Peterson, a veteran librarian with over 30 years of secrets buried in the Hartford archives. "I'm looking for a couple who vanished from the records, Thomas and Elizabeth," Sarah said, her voice strained with urgency. Mrs. Peterson adjusted her reading glasses thoughtfully. "Sometimes what the newspapers ignore, the cathedrals remember." That lead took Sarah to the Trinity Episcopal Church. In the dim basement, surrounded by leather-bound registers smelling of aged pastor. There was a Thomas and Elizabeth on the 13th, another on the 20th, but the 15th. Total silence. "Is it possible for a wedding to leave no trace?" Sarah asked. Pastor Williams paused, his gaze turning distant. It happened. Forbidden marriages, class divides, or secrets that demanded absolute discretion. Those ceremonies were performed in the shadows with no fanfare, and most importantly, no official paperwork. Sarah's heart raced. Was Elizabeth's smile the look of someone who had just successfully escaped the chains of society? Back at the Historical Society, Sarah decided on a bold move. With the precision of a surgeon, she began to dismantle the ornate wooden frame. She felt the ancient wood resisting her as if trying to guard its secret for another century. And then, her patience paid off. Tucked between the photograph and the cardboard backing a small folded slip of paper yellowed by time, fell out. This wasn't just scrap paper. This was a message sent from the black hole of history. Sarah's hands trembled as she unfolded the small scrap of paper. The purple ink had faded over the decades, but the message remained razor-sharp. Dearest Thomas, by the time you read this, I will be far from Hartford. The photographs must tell the story. Remember our signal. Forever yours. EA signal. Sarah stared at the portrait, her mind racing. Could that impossible smile be more than just an expression? Was it a code? She gripped her magnifying glass once more, focusing on Elizabeth's left hand, partially obscured by the folds of her lace wedding gown. Elizabeth's fingers weren't placed in a standard formal pose. They were arranged awkwardly as if forming a specific shape. Sarah immediately dove into research on Victorian secret languages. She discovered a 1902 etiquette manual detailing the finger telegraph, a clandestine way for women to communicate when speech was forbidden. Then she froze. She found an illustration that perfectly matched Elizabeth's hand position. It was a warning signal: danger. Help needed. Nothing is as it seems. A cold shiver ran down Sarah's spine. This wasn't just an unusual wedding portrait. This was a desperate attempt to leave behind evidence of something horrific. Elizabeth's smile wasn't born of joy. It was a mask of sheer courage used to hide absolute terror. It was a cry for help that had gone unanswered for over 120 years. No longer just a historian looking for romance, Sarah was now a detective hunting for a cold case lead. She abandoned the marriage records and threw herself into police archives and missing persons reports from the summer of 1903. Was there an Elizabeth who vanished shortly after this photo was taken? What was the truth behind that smile, and who exactly was Thomas in this deadly game? Sarah's breakthrough came from an unlikely source, the Hartford Courant's Society pages from July 1903. Tucked away among Tea Party announcements, she found a chilling sentence. The ladies of the Hartford Women's Aid Society were expressing concern for Elizabeth Hayes, who had failed to attend a charity lunch despite confirming her presence. The name Elizabeth Hayes surfaced again, but something was wrong. The church record said she married on June 13th, but the portrait was dated the 15th. Why the two-day discrepancy? Sarah rushed back to Trinity Episcopal. Under a flickering light, she and Pastor Williams scrutinized the registry once more. "Look closer," Pastor Sarah whispered. The ink for the June 13th entry was darker, the handwriting distinctly different. It was a forgery, a backdated entry meant to legitimize something that needed to stay hidden. In 1903, backdating a marriage was often a desperate attempt to shield a family from social scandal. But for Elizabeth, this wasn't about reputation. It was a sentence. At the Hartford Police Archives, Officer Martinez guided Sarah through the labyrinth of the past. Finally, a thick folder fell open to a yellowed page. Elizabeth Hayes, age 23. Reported missing by her sister Margaret on July 20th, 1903. Last seen at home on July 15th. The exact date on the portrait. Brown hair, blue eyes, 5'4". The report noted unusual behavior in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. The paper trail led to Asylum Street, once the height of Hartford fashion, in 1903. Sarah stood before the original Victorian home. Today, it's converted into apartments, but the walls still guard the secrets of 120 years ago. Elizabeth was here the day she vanished. That wedding portrait was the last image of her before she stepped into the shadows. Did her sister Margaret know the truth? And what part did Thomas, the man in the photo, play in his wife's disappearance? The current owner, an elderly man named Robert, invited Sarah in once she explained the weight of her historical research. "The Hayes family, right?" Robert nodded thoughtfully. "I've lived here for 40 years. The previous owner mentioned finding some old papers in the attic during renovations. They might still be up there." In the dust-choked attic buried beneath layers of insulation installed decades later, Sarah's fingers brushed against something solid. It was a small, weather-beaten wooden chest, a time capsule of raw emotion. Inside were personal letters, photographs, and documents belonging to the Hayes family. Sarah's hands shook as she opened a diary with the name Margaret Hayes written in careful script on the cover. The entries from the summer of 1903 painted a terrifying picture. June 10th, 1903. Elizabeth has been acting strangely since she met that man, Thomas. She rarely mentions him, only that they plan to marry. I haven't even been introduced to him yet, which is unheard of for my dear sister. June 16th, 1903. Elizabeth returned from the wedding appearing like a different person. She smiles when she thinks no one is looking, but her eyes are heavy with a primal fear. She begged me not to ask about Thomas or their life together. July 1st, 1903. Today I followed Elizabeth and discovered a shocking truth. She isn't living with Thomas at all. Instead, she is hiding in a tiny room above Mrs. Patterson's bakery on Main Street. When I confronted her, she collapsed into tears. She confessed the marriage was a setup, a desperate gambit to escape a horrific situation. She wouldn't say another word. July 14th, 1903. Tonight, Elizabeth came to me in a state of total panic. She said Thomas is not who he claims to be. She found something so dangerous that her life is now forfeit. She's fleeing Hartford tonight. She handed Margaret the wedding portrait and whispered, "This photo will explain everything if anything happens to me." Margaret begged her to go to the police, but Elizabeth only shook her head. "They won't believe a woman," she said. "Not against a man like him." Now, Sarah understood. That impossible smile wasn't a sign of joy, it was a defiant signal to her sister. The hand hidden in the lace wasn't a pose, it was a desperate piece of evidence. Who was the man posing as Thomas? And what did Elizabeth find that was worth a life? The truth is no longer buried. It's screaming from the pages of a forgotten diary. July 21st, 1903. Margaret wrote in despair. "My sister is missing. The police don't care. They think she simply ran off with her husband." But Margaret knew better. Thomas had vanished, too, and their marriage had been a facade from the very beginning. Sarah closed the diary, her hands still trembling. She looked once more at Elizabeth's smile in the wedding portrait. It wasn't the glow of a happy bride. It was the brave face of a woman capturing the final evidence of her existence before disappearing into the void. Sarah returned to the 1903 Hartford City Directory. She cross-referenced hundreds of men named Thomas. Then a chilling entry caught her eye. Thomas Miller, private investigator. Office. At 245 Main Street, only 3 blocks from the bakery where Elizabeth had been secretly hiding. The private detective profession in 1903 was far from the cinematic heroics we know today. It was a murky gray world. Detectives were often hired by wealthy families to clean up scandals or hunt down individuals who held damaging secrets. At the Hartford History Museum, Dr. James Walsh provided Sarah with deeper insight. Thomas Miller's old business cards were still preserved, advertising discreet investigations and secret consultations. According to Dr. Walsh, detectives back then operated in a legal gray area. While some were professionals, many were little more than hired thugs used for intimidation and illegal apprehension. Was Thomas Miller ever truly Elizabeth's husband? Or was he a hunter hired to silence her forever? What kind of cases involved a girl like Elizabeth? Sarah asked. Dr. Walsh's answer was chilling. In 1903, private detectives were the tools of the ultra-wealthy hired to handle discrete problems, blackmail, recovering stolen property, or silencing those who held dangerous secrets. Sarah's stomach churned. The pieces were falling into place. That wedding portrait wasn't a record of a union, it was evidence of a forced surrender. Elizabeth wasn't a bride, she was a high-stakes target in a deadly game of cat and mouse. Her investigation into Thomas Miller led to a shocking discovery in a September 1903 issue of the Hartford Courant. Just 2 months after Elizabeth vanished, the detective met a tragic end at the local rail yard. The report claimed Miller fell from a moving freight car while investigating a case involving missing documents. An accident or a ruthless cleanup? The timing was too perfect to be anything other than a calculated hit. Sarah began to connect the dots. Elizabeth had fled, carrying documents of immense value. Thomas Miller was hired to hunt her down, using a sham marriage as a mask to trap and control her. But in the end, both the hunter and the hunted were swallowed by the shadows of history. Something far more dangerous than a simple disappearance was hiding behind Elizabeth's smile. It was a power struggle where human lives were mere pawns on a chessboard, controlled by monsters behind the scenes. Sarah had finally reached the eye of the storm. To understand why Elizabeth was in such mortal danger, she needed to know what secret she carried. Her persistence paid off. Buried in the archives was a headline that shook the city in May 1903, the Hartford National Bank embezzlement scandal. $50,000 had vanished into thin air. In 1903, that was the equivalent of over $1.5 million today, a fortune men would kill to keep hidden. The bank's president, William Thornton, didn't call the police. Instead, he hired a private bloodhound to recover the loot. Thomas Miller. The timeline began to click into place with terrifying precision. May. The embezzlement is discovered. Late May. Thomas Miller begins his hunt. Early June. He targets Elizabeth. June 15th. The forged wedding portrait is taken. Why would a private investigator need a marriage to a young woman? Was Elizabeth a co-conspirator or the only person who held the key to the missing fortune? That photograph wasn't a keepsake. It was an interrogation masked in Victorian lace. Sarah went back to Margaret's diary, scouring every word for clues about Elizabeth's life. What did a 23-year-old woman in 1903 Hartford do for a living? Was she a typist at the bank, a maid in the Thornton estate? Every word written by Margaret seemed to tremble under Sarah's desk lamp. Elizabeth had seen something she wasn't supposed to see. She had become an accidental witness to a crime far beyond her control. Her smile in the portrait was the final act of a soul backed into a corner. Sarah finally found the deciding piece of the puzzle in a diary entry from the spring of 1903. Elizabeth wasn't just an ordinary girl. She was a clerk at Hartford National Bank. This was more than just a dream job for that era. It was a position that gave her access to the bank's darkest secrets, transaction records, sensitive logs, and information that could expose the true identity of the person who embezzled $50,000. Elizabeth wasn't just an employee, she was the keeper of the truth. Everything started becoming chillingly clear. If Elizabeth had found evidence against Thomas, or worse, if this detective himself was the one behind the embezzlement, then her life was in danger from that very moment. This wedding was never a happy beginning. It was a masterfully orchestrated trap. Thomas used the title of husband to gain her trust and control her every move. He didn't want to love her. He wanted to silence her. A fake marriage to cover up a real crime. But Elizabeth didn't break. Realizing she was cornered by a cold-blooded predator, she turned her portrait session into a silent crime scene. That forced smile wasn't just the social pressure of the era. It was a mask hiding her alertness in the face of her enemy. Her hand signals for help, and the secret note were the solid evidence she left behind for future generations. She knew she might disappear, but the truth had to remain to demand justice. Sarah understood that now she wasn't just looking for a missing person. She was on a mission to honor the courage of a woman forgotten by history. Her next goal is the official records of the embezzlement investigation. The truth about Elizabeth and the culprit named Thomas is very close, just behind the shifting layers of time's dust. What would you do if you realized the man you just swore to spend your life with was actually a killer lurking in the shadows? This isn't a Hollywood horror movie. This was the chilling reality Elizabeth faced in the summer of 1903. A world-shaking secret has been uncovered. Elizabeth was no helpless victim. She was the only one who held the key to exposing one of the most sophisticated embezzlement schemes in the history of Hartford National Bank. Don't let the gentle appearance of a bank clerk fool you. At Hartford Bank, Elizabeth possessed a power that even the most influential men craved access to confidential records. $50,000 back then was an unfathomable fortune, and it had vanished without a trace. While the entire city was in a panic, Elizabeth was quietly connecting the dots from a series of forged transactions. She knew too much, and at that moment, an invisible death warrant was signed for her. Who was the culprit? Prepare to be shocked. It was Thomas Miller. He wasn't just a private detective hired to find the missing money. He was a wolf leading the pack. Thomas didn't marry Elizabeth out of love. He married her to carry out a much more sinister plot to silence the witness. It was a masterfully orchestrated marriage, turning love into a steel cage, designed to control Elizabeth's every move and every breath. He wanted to use the title of husband to wipe away every piece of evidence she held. Backed into a corner, what did Elizabeth do? She didn't break. She knew she couldn't run, but she could leave a voice for future generations. In her iconic portrait, that forced smile was a declaration of war. Every hand signal and every secret note was an arrow aimed directly at the truth. She turned herself into a living crime scene, believing that even if she vanished into thin air, justice would eventually have to be served. Years later, when Thomas Miller collapsed at the rail yard, the truth finally exploded. $30,000 in cash and bank documents with Elizabeth's forged signature were discovered in a secret drawer. He died in disgrace, while Elizabeth's name shines bright as a symbol of courage. Police notes attached to the report provided one final chilling detail. Miller had forced Elizabeth Hayes to sign documents authenticating his fraudulent transactions. Her disappearance likely occurred the moment she threatened to expose his scheme. Furthermore, Miller's death appeared to be a suicide rather than an accident, a final desperate act to evade arrest and prosecution. Sarah leaned back in her chair, stunned by the tragic story she had just uncovered. Elizabeth was never Thomas's willing bride. She was his victim, coerced into aiding his embezzlement plot and then eliminated once she became a threat. The wedding portrait was no celebration. It was Elizabeth's desperate attempt to leave behind evidence of her plight, knowing Thomas intended to silence her forever. Sarah's investigation had unburied a heartbreaking tale of courage and victimization, hidden for over 120 years. The messages Elizabeth skillfully concealed in her wedding portrait, the brave smile masking her horror, the secret hand signal for help, and the clues pointing toward the truth had finally been decoded. But Sarah's work was far from over. She felt a deep responsibility to ensure Elizabeth's story was told and her bravery finally recognized. She prepared a comprehensive report documenting her findings and contacted the Hartford Courant, hoping they would publish Elizabeth's story as a historical feature. The editor-in-chief, Maria Rodriguez, was captivated by the investigation. "This is exactly the kind of historical mystery our readers love," she said. "But more importantly, it is the story of a woman who showed extraordinary courage under seemingly insurmountable circumstances." Sarah also reached out to genealogy websites, hoping to find any living descendants of the Hayes family who might want to know Elizabeth's fate. Her search led to Patricia Hayes, a fourth-generation niece living in Boston, who had always been curious about family stories regarding an ancestor who mysteriously vanished in Hartford. "We always heard whispers about Aunt Elizabeth," Patricia said during a phone call. "My great-grandmother used to say that Elizabeth tried to help catch a bad guy but ended up paying the price for it. I never knew if those stories were actually true." Patricia traveled to Hartford to see the portrait and finally connect with her ancestors' history. Standing inside the Historical Society, gazing at Elizabeth's image with a profound new understanding, she wiped away tears. "She was so young," Patricia whispered. "But she tried to do the right thing even when she knew it put her life in danger." Sarah arranged for the portrait to be professionally preserved and permanently displayed at the Hartford History Museum. Beside the frame, a plaque now stands detailing Elizabeth's full story. This exhibition ensures that every visitor understands not only the historical reality of early 20th century bank fraud, but also the incredible bravery of a young woman who refused to stay silent in the face of corruption. Sarah took one last look at Elizabeth's portrait before it was moved to its new home in the museum. She felt a sense of awe at how a woman's desperate cry for help, hidden in plain sight for over a century, had finally brought the truth to light. Elizabeth's smile, once a haunting mystery, now serves as a testament to her courage. It is a powerful reminder that sometimes the most ordinary photographs contain the most extraordinary stories, simply waiting for someone willing to look closely enough to see what everyone else missed. Elizabeth Hayes reminds us that integrity is not defined by one's status or power, but by the choices we make when everything is on the line. Her bravery from 1903 echoes into the present, proving that the truth is a debt that time always eventually pays. Thank you for following this journey into the past. What part of Elizabeth's story moved you the most? Let's honor her memory in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of forgotten heroes.